Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Arcade with Alvin. Today we're going to be making the KFC bucket meal from I Love You, Colonel Sanders, a dating sim game that took the internet by storm a couple years ago because you are now trying to date your classmate, Colonel Sanders, and he's very highly attractive. Not that he wasn't before, but this one makes him super delicious. Now, this game also made waves in the Japanese gaming community, as dating sims are very popular in Japan as a form of game, and since we did go to Japan, we took the opportunity to also try out Japanese KFC and do a recreation of their bucket meal, as Japanese KFC is supposedly better and different. A big thank you to Bombas for sponsoring today's episode. These are hands down the most comfortable socks I've ever worn, and everybody knows new socks makes the best stocking stuffers. But the warm and cozy vibes aren't just for you, and that's the best part, because for every pair purchased, one is donated. So treat your friends, families, colleagues, or even yourself to the comfiest gift of the year. And know that you're also helping donate the top 3 most requested items in homeless shelters across the US: socks, underwear, and t-shirts to those in need this season. I've already helped myself to a bunch of Bombas new holiday drops, and I'm gifting all my loved ones the plushiest, softest essentials for the season. If you haven't tried Bombas yet, new customers get 20% off their first purchase. Just go to bombas.com/babish and use code BABISH20 at checkout. KFC in Japan is synonymous with the best holiday of the year, Christmas. To have a fast food chain literally be associated with everyone's favorite holiday is quite a miracle, which means that the KFC in Japan must be good, right? Tony and I ventured to a pretty popular looking KFC out in Tokyo, and we ordered a couple things. We got a bucket meal with a lot of drumsticks and thighs. We also got some sides and some different flavors. There was an extra spicy one and an extra crispy one. And upon getting our haul and inspecting it, one thing is that the biscuits they got holes in them. Kind of like donuts. Coleslaw looks pretty much the same, but the chicken, this is where things got a little weird. Now, expecting Japanese KFC, like many other fast foods, to be better than their Western counterpart, this one was actually really disappointing. The skin was not crispy at all. It was a wet batter. They didn't do any sort of dry, craggly crust that I was used to in a KFC, and the texture was very soggy, and the meat was a texture that was like it was braised. It was very soft and fall apart. This one tasted like it had been sitting in the bottom of the bucket and steaming for over an hour. The flavor wasn't too great either. It definitely lacked a lot of the famous spices and herbs that the Western version has. Maybe they used a different recipe, but it was weird because when we got like a spicy, extra crispy one, that one tasted way closer to the original KFC that I was used to. So the biscuits were nothing to write home about, kind of dry, similar to the ones that we have. Coleslaw tasted very similar to the ones that we had in the US, but a little tangier and a little milder, maybe because of the Kewpie mayo they used instead of regular mayo. Anyways, even though our experience in Japan at this KFC maybe wasn't stellar due to their, unlucky day perhaps, I think there's a way we can make a home improved version of this Japanese-style KFC based on some of the flavors that we did taste that we enjoyed. Okay, so the first things first, probably the most important part about making any sort of KFC is going to be the secret spices and herbs. But we took what we got from both Western and Japanese adaptations of what they might like in their flavors and added them together. So for our spices and herbs, we're going to combine 2 tablespoons of paprika, 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 2 teaspoons of black pepper, 1 teaspoon dried mustard, 1 teaspoon dried thyme, 3 tablespoons of white pepper, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 cube of chicken bouillon, and 1 tablespoon of MSG. Now the additions that we definitely changed were the chicken bouillon, the white pepper went heavier on that, and definitely the MSG, as those were the flavors I tasted primarily in the Japanese style KFC. So after combining that, we're going to go ahead and get started on the seasoning. This spice mixture is going to get added to our drumsticks, and instead of bone-in chicken thighs, I found that boneless but skin-on chicken thighs usually work better for fried chicken. And we did actually have some boneless chicken thighs in Japan when they came to KFC, so I thought that was a really cool adjustment. Made it a lot more fun to eat. That's going to get a heavy dose of our seasoning and marinate for probably at least an hour or so the juices get a chance to come out and kind of maybe evenly more distribute the spices around the chicken. Then I'm going to add a couple tablespoons of the spice mixture into our buttermilk, and once that is ready to go, I'm going to pour that over our meat that has been marinated for at least an hour, so that way every single layer of our dredging process has seasoning. The meat has seasoning, the buttermilk has seasoning, and of course our batter also needs to have seasonings. Now, one thing that I definitely realized was a very signature thing of eating KFC was that the crust was very heavily seasoned. I'm going to go extra heavy on our flour dredge. Not only am I going to add the previous seasoning that we made as a blend, I'm going to add extra MSG, extra black pepper, and extra extra white pepper to our flour mixture to really give it that strong seasoned taste. About 2 teaspoons extra of each. This way we ensure that no matter what bite of fried chicken we get, it's all going to be seasoned all the way through. Now, just to batter and dredge, I'm going to pour the buttermilk over the chicken and just make sure that's evenly coated before dipping that into our seasoned flour mix and then letting that sit on a tray with the wire rack. I'm trying not to let this get too tacky. I think that's a technique that you can use if you really want to have an absorbent flour that you can also re-dip in flour, but just because I don't want too thick of a crust, I'm going to dredge this and go to frying as soon as possible. And the thing about making fried chicken or any kind of fried thing with a dredge station is that you inevitably end up with extra flour and dredge. And most people, they throw it away. There's nothing really much you can do, but I don't like that. I want to see what I can make with it. So all I'm doing is pouring all of the leftover flour into the leftover buttermilk mixture, and upon seeing that it's still a little bit wet, I'm just adding a little bit more flour until it reaches the consistency of kind of like a sticky batter. And just to amp this up, I have an idea. Let's chop up some cheddar cheese that we have lying around in the fridge and just throw a couple of those cubes in there. Can we have like a sticky biscuit batter with cheese cubes in it? More on that later. We're going to turn that into something fun, I promise. Alright, our oil is in a Dutch oven heated to 350 degrees, and I'm going to fry 3 to 4 pieces at a time for about 7 to 10 minutes until they have browned all the way through. I like to fry the same cut before frying the other cut because that way you can kind of cook them with a more of an even doneness across, because the boneless chicken thighs without our skin on are going to cook differently than the drumsticks. One is a little bit thinner and flatter, one is thicker but smaller. So once those are going to be nice and crispy and lightly golden brown, they're going to be resting on a wire rack with some paper towels while I fry the rest of it. Now we have a beautiful platter of our home-style Japanese KFC fried chicken, but the show is not even close to being over yet. We still have the sides to make, because as is important in every KFC bucket meal, the sides are kind of what makes it exciting. So let's first get started with our biscuits. Now the biscuits that we had in Japan and the ones here, not super crazy good, so we do want to emulate a standard biscuit recipe, but isn't too over the top because it's not supposed to be the highlight of the show. So for our biscuits, I'm going to take 3 cups of white flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of kosher salt, half teaspoon of baking soda, and I'm going to sift that until everything is nice and well sifted, no huge lumps. Then I'm going to cube up a stick of cold unsalted butter, cut that into small pieces and throw that in there. And while I am mixing, I'm going to kind of try to press the butter into small little pieces until it reaches about pebble or pea size. I don't want it too big lumps in there because I'm not trying to make like a laminated kind of pie crust biscuit. This one is, I think, a little bit more on the southern style where they're a little bit more tender and kind of fall apart rather than layered and laminated, but I could be wrong. Then I'm going to add about a cup of buttermilk until everything comes together but is not too wet or sticky or tacky, because if you hydrate with too much water, the gluten is going to make that biscuit tough. Once I think this is ready to go, I'm going to gently roll this out and pat this flat on my cutting board, and that way I can use a cookie cutter to cut out nice rounds from our biscuits. Now, Rachel taught me that if you want to make these kinds of biscuits, it's best not to turn the cutter after pressing them down into the biscuit dough, because then you might accidentally ruin those nice little layers you created on the side. So that was kind of a cool tip to see. If you just press down and let go, remove your biscuit, and then you can get and see these little tiny layers in the middle. So I personally didn't like the fact that there were holes in the Japanese version. I'm not sure why they did that outside of saving, time. I also don't know where the rest of the biscuit batter went. And I think it made it a little too dry, so I'm not going to do any extra holes in the middle. I really don't think that adds value, especially when it comes to a biscuit. To bake these, I'm going to put these on a tray with some parchment paper and brush with some buttermilk and have them browning extra nicely in the oven because of the buttermilk on top. These are just going to bake at 350 degrees until they're nice and brown. Halfway, they're still not brown as I'd like, so we got the idea to brush a little bit more butter on top of them mid-bake and put them back in the oven until they are nice and brown. Okay, on to the coleslaw. Now the one from the game and the one in real life didn't seem too crazy. I think it's literally just diced up carrots and cabbage. So that is exactly what we're gonna do. Gonna take some carrots, gonna take some cabbage, and once both have those peels and excess leaves taken off, just gonna be cut into tiny little squares and chunks until they are the nice texture of a typical coleslaw. What's interesting is that compared to typical coleslaw, it is not shredded. It is definitely these little chunks that are flatter. Personally, I think that's a more interesting texture because also if you have the shreds, they tend to get soggy a little bit quicker. So that's what I noticed across the Japanese KFC and the one that we had here. Then for the dressing, typically in the US you would just use a bunch of like Hellmann's mayo and some seasonings, but because it's supposed to be a Japanese-style KFC, I'm going to use a quarter cup of Kewpie mayo, a quarter cup of vinegar, 3 tablespoons of sugar, a teaspoon of sesame oil, and just like a teaspoon of MSG and a pinch of salt, just to have some seasoning. That is going to go directly over our cabbage and carrots and sit until they get nice and flavored throughout. Because coleslaw, I think, is actually supposed to be served more marinated, not freshly made, because then you kind of want the flavor of the dressing to penetrate through the vegetables and soften them up a little bit. All right, on to the famous KFC mashed potatoes. Now, my memory serves me correctly. They should be made with russet potatoes and are super smooth because it almost has like a white bordering on gray color when you get them, but the gravy kind of comes in and saves the day. And yet, no matter how you eat them with or without gravy, they're still quite delicious. So it's gonna peel 5 russet potatoes, and for the sake of not wasting peels, I learned this trick where you can take the peels of the potatoes and actually add them to half and half or milk that you're going to add back later into what is commonly a typical mashed potato recipe, and kind of infuse those potato skins flavor into that. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. 2 cups of half and half with our potato peels are just going to go into the stove and simmer while we cube up the rest of our potatoes. Those potatoes are going to go into a pot of boiling water, and once that's at a boil, we drop that to a simmer until it is fork tender. Okay, make sure to turn off the heat on the half and half once it is simmering because we don't want it to curdle or overcook. And then once our potatoes are ready, I'm going to drain that, continue mashing these potatoes in this pot just to release a lot of that extra moisture and almost give it a chalky texture. So that way it'll better absorb all that half and half we're going to add to it later. Once that's all ready to go, we're going to strain our half and half and continue to mash our potatoes, and then realizing that Rachel actually brought a ricer from home, which is going to give us a lot smoother of a texture for our mashed potatoes. So once running our potatoes through the ricer, that's looking a lot smoother. I'm going to mix in our potato skin infused half and half, which does smell like mashed potatoes in itself. And then I'm going to add in some butter because mashed potatoes and butter are like a match made in heaven. This is about 6 tablespoons worth. Honestly, you can't really add too much. Some of the best potatoes in the world are literally half butter, half mashed potatoes. So add as much butter as your heart desires. Just don't tell whoever you're eating how much you put in it. To get that really super smooth texture, I'm going to run this mixture one more time through a chinois strainer, which has really fine holes. This definitely took a lot of arm work because I'm holding this up with one hand and pressing down with the other, but the result is a ultra creamy smooth mashed potato mixture. And even though there's chunks at the bottom with a little paste that I can't seem to press through anymore, I'm going to take that out and just leave that as a snack just for us. This was seasoned with salt to taste, and oh boy, this tastes good. Nothing wrong with potatoes half and half in butter and salt, because honestly, that kind of stuff's just designed to taste good. All right, so time for the gravy. I bet you that KFC isn't making their fresh gravy from, stocks and bones and things like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and make an instant gravy, but I'm gonna jazz it up with a couple things. We have just a brown instant gravy packet that we're going to combine with not water, but chicken stock this time, just to give it a little bit more flavor. And once that is brought to a simmer and starts to get a little too thick, I'm gonna add half and half just to dilute it out and give us that nice creamy texture as well as some extra flavor. All right, once our gravy is ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and start plating up because our chicken is probably rested by now and is ready to eat. Coleslaw is going to go into one bowl, which have been painted white and red by Tony, just like the game. We're also going to plate our mashed potatoes in the other bowl, making sure to strain the gravy one last time right over the top for the ultra creamiest texture possible. Then just as a finishing touch, they don't do this at Japanese KFC or the Western one, but I do like a little bit of honey butter on my biscuits to compensate for any lack of flavor or dryness that might have happened while the biscuits were in the oven. Now we're going to plate that up, and I present to you our homemade version and interpretation of the KFC bucket meal, the Japanese version from I Love You Colonel Sanders, dating sim. Now I don't know about him, but I would say that if this were presented to him in game, he'd be quite proud, and it earned him a lot of those heart points that makes the heart go doki doki. Okay, let's give it a shot and see how this compares to the Japanese and the Western KFC. So I think flavor-wise, it's different, but I do really like it. I think because we went ultra heavy on the MSG and white pepper, it leans more towards the Japanese KFC style flavor. And personally, I like this a lot more because white pepper and MSG is something used in a lot of Chinese cooking. So as a Chinese person growing up eating a lot of our food, that is a flavor that is very prominent. So I might be a little bit biased, but I think this tastes a lot more delicious than your typical fried chicken where there is a lack of seasoning, a lack of spices. And just like the KFC here and in Japan, the crust itself has so much spice and seasoning, it is definitely a seasoning of its own. And I find that quite delicious and exciting. It kind of makes you want to eat the crust even more. taking a bite of the coleslaw. It's actually quite nice. The refreshingness of the coleslaw with the crunch of the squarely cut shapes instead of the stringy ones, tasting with the Kewpie and the vinegar and the sesame oil, makes this a lot more palatable than traditional coleslaw where people bring it but nobody eats it, but they just pretend like they need to bring it, so it's just sitting there. The potatoes, yeah, these potatoes are good. Mashed potatoes with gravy can't really go wrong, especially with the way that we did it with half and half and butter. It tastes extra potatoey, probably because of the potato skins, maybe because it's just really good. Either way, we didn't waste the potato skins, so I like that. So the biscuits, we accidentally doubled the salt without realizing it, so in the recipe, we actually going to half that. Biscuits were a little too salty. You're gonna need some extra water for this, but I do like the honey butter on top. That was nice. And here's a shot of the boneless but skin on chicken thighs fried. I like this cross section because honestly, this is the best ratio of fried chicken crust to chicken meat tender inside. You don't have to work around a bone. You don't get these big pockets of chicken that don't have any seasoning. You kind of flatten everything out. So everything is just like a nice, beautiful chicken fried patty. Oh, and the leftover biscuit batter. We can't forget about that. So this is the biscuit batter we made from the buttermilk dredge and the seasoned flour dredge that we just literally combined, added extra flour, added some cheese cubes. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a cookie scoop and scoop them out into a bowl of breadcrumbs that we had lying around. Shape them with my hands, make sure to roll them up into roughly spherical shapes because they're kind of soft, making sure that they get extra breadcrumbs if they need to. And with the leftover heat from our hot oil that hasn't cooled down yet, I'm just gonna fry these in there until they're nice and golden brown, and we kind of end up with these cheesy, super seasoned hush puppy style things. Not really a name for this. This is really just made out of leftovers, but does taste like a pretty good snack to enjoy with everything else that we made today. And honestly, it does taste like an appetizer in itself, which is quite impressive given the fact that they were made with literally the leftovers that are usually tossed. So I'm really happy about this one. There's only 4 of us in the studio today, but we made a bucket meal for probably a whole family. And I'll take this home and reheat it to our desires and eat it whenever we want. And the best way I like to reheat fried chicken is in a convection oven or an air fryer if you have one. That'll re-crisp it up, give it a nice freshness of life that the microwave just won't do justice. All right, back to this dating sim. Let's see if we can get Colonel Sanders to really fall in love with me.